Everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. My name is Dr. Amy Malik. I am the director and chair of the Iranian and Persian Gulf Studies program here at Oklahoma State University. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome today Dr. Kaveh Madani for a conversation around environmental justice, water security in the Middle East. So I'll start by offering a brief introduction. And then we'll just have a conversation among the three of us. If you have any questions during the course of our event, please use the link, and the QR code is just up here to submit your questions, and I will be monitoring them here so we can try to get to as many as possible. First, I'll start with some introductions. So Dr. Kaveh Madani is an environmental scientist, educator, and activist known for his work on complex human-natural systems at the interface of science, policy, and society. He's currently the director of the United Nations University Institute of Water, Environment, and Health, known as the UN think tank on water. There, he leads scientific research and policy solutions to address the growing global water and environmental crises. Dr. Madani is a former deputy vice president of Iran who served as the deputy head of Iran's Department of Environment. He has also served as the vice president of the UN Environment Assembly Bureau and chief of Iran's Department of Environment's International Affairs and Convention Center. He held different strategic roles during his public service and led Iran's delegation in different major intergovernmental meetings and negotiations. As a prolific scholar, Dr. Madani has worked extensively on complex issues in water management, environmental and energy policy, food security, climate change impacts and adaptation, sustainable development, and transboundary conflicts and negotiations in North America, Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. He's received several prestigious awards and recognitions. I won't read them all, but he's a well-known scholar as well as member of the policy community. So we're very honored to have him here with us today. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Madani.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
So let's start. Do you want to start, Dr. Mirchi? I should also introduce you as well. Dr. Ali Mirchi is joining me in this conversation. Maybe you should do better to introduce yourself.
Thank you for being here. I'm Ali Mirchi, Assistant Professor of Water Resources Engineering at Oklahoma State University's Department of Biosystems and Agricultural Engineering. I share your enthusiasm about hosting Dr. Madani today and the interest we have received from the campus community during the past 2 days. So I want to start with water, and thank you for bringing all the rain because we have badly needed the rain. I was checking on, and we have received 1.2 inches of rain, and hopefully that'll help us, get through the drought period that we've been experiencing, because we have been. I've been checking the U.S. drought monitor. We had a severe to exceptional drought, and this rain is very much appreciated.
You're welcome.
So, speaking of water, the United Nations recently had its 2023 water conference last month, actually. It happened after nearly half a century. And you briefed the media about the status of water security worldwide. So how are we doing on water globally?
Terrible. So the world as a whole is water bankrupt. Our demand is definitely more than the available renewable water resources what the nature is giving us. And in many parts of the world, we are seeing the signs of water bankruptcy in different ways. Shrinking lakes, wetlands, and rivers, declining groundwater, desertification, deforestation, sand and dust storms, wildfires, biodiversity loss, migrating farmers, rural communities that are people in rural communities losing employment and livelihood. And then on top of this, like the issues of the world with food insecurity, the environmental damages that we're causing, and climate change. So if you look at this mix is quite scary. Of course, in many parts of the world, the situations are better. In some parts of the world, we're running out of water because we're using too much of it. In some other parts of the world, there are people, water is everywhere, but people don't have water for drinking. So this is also another aspect of this water bankruptcy, that even when it comes to infrastructure, access to clean water, sanitation, we are dealing with a world that is suffering from great inequality and environmental injustice. So the situation is really, really bad. But we got to ask why for nearly 50 years we didn't talk about water, why we didn't have a UN water conference. I mean, that would have been your next question. I'm going to answer it myself. Probably because water is everywhere, and generally we have been thinking that through technology and investment of more money, we can resolve water shortage issues. So we were concerned about building infrastructure and providing water to people. We're not really thinking about the unintended consequences of so many technological reforms and intervention that nowadays we're seeing the impacts.
I want to zoom out from water specifically to think about environmental degradation more broadly, and especially in the Middle East. How did we get here? What are some of the symptoms that you're seeing, and how did they come about?
So, all of the things I mentioned, if you look at what is happening in the Middle East, you see those, right? Mm-hmm. And add to it the issue of climate change, poor governance, bad economies, and then war, sanctions, conflicts, tension, and all of these, then you know why there's the lack of stability, why many countries can't get their act together to address the issues. But let's go back in history and see how we got here. Many people, especially engineers, I'm an engineer too, had the mentality, in the Middle East we were dealing with what? Countries that had a lot of wealth, oil and gas was there, ambitious leaders, years of history. Water has always been a challenge. Water shortage has been always a challenge. And of course, if you're short on water, you have issues with agriculture. But the mentality there is the general thinking paradigm was that through investing in infrastructure, through investing in technological reforms, we can address this issue. That is why we have some leaders who have been super ambitious about how to deal with water. And you see general trends when you look at Iran before the revolution, after the revolution. You look at Saudi Arabia, you look at Egypt, Libya, Iraq, a lot of Turkey, a lot of things are in common, even though these countries are not necessarily the same in terms of their climatic conditions and even socioeconomic conditions. But the thought there was that we invest in technology, we build dams, we dig deeper, we dig wells and dig deeper when necessary. We build desalination plants, we transfer water, and we can overcome this shortage. Even we have had leaders who thought that not only they can become food self-sufficient, so the dream of, for example, the Iranian leaders, but also some people who had the crazy thought of exporting food. We see that in the 90s, for example, the Saudis become a food exporter, wheat exporter. And as a result of that ambitious target or goal, then they kind of exhaust their groundwater. So we're dealing with people who didn't see this shortcoming as a natural thing, as a natural limit to which they have to adapt themselves and set policies accordingly. Instead, we didn't see water as a limit to growth. Money was the major thing. And then we have the issue of trying to replicate what has happened in the West. So a lot of problems we're seeing in that part of the world has similar aspects with what we are seeing, for example, in US West and so on. But the socioeconomic context is very different. So the chance of adaptation, the chance of mitigation, the chance of changing the course is very limited, and that's why we're dealing with these problems. We didn't see it coming. And what you're seeing in the water sector is not much different from what you're seeing when you're dealing with air pollution, with waste, with biodiversity laws. So in all environmental sectors, we have the same thing. Now, we have to admit that again, the countries in the Middle East are not the same. They're not the same in size. They're not the same in their socioeconomic and political conditions. And then their limitations of water resources. Some are richer than others. Some enjoy huge climatic variability. And we are seeing in that part of the world, for example, the attitude of Israel to water is different from the attitude of other countries. Like Egypt doesn't have oil and gas resources like the Saudis or the Iranians. Their attitude, so there are some different approaches that they have taken. We also see the Persian Gulf, the states in the south of Persian Gulf have also developed their water plans differently. But in all of these plans, all of these development plans, you see one common thing, and that is relying too much on technology and not trying to do much on the policy side.
All right, so you mentioned climate variability and some of these challenges related to water availability. There's a huge debate about climate change and the role of climate change. We're in dealing with a warming world, and we're seeing at the same time we're seeing that the whole lakes are shrinking and disappearing. There are examples in the United States, for example, the Great Salt Lake in Utah is shrinking. Lake Urmia is not doing very well, and actually doing it's pretty much gone, unfortunately. Of course, historically, we had the Aral Sea in Central Asia. We also have the Dead Sea in a transboundary region, and also. So, what is the role of climate change? Are all of these changes driven by climate change, or do human activities have an impact too?
So as I said, we have the issues of bad management, and on top of that, climate change is kicking in. So we got to be careful about talking about climate change in the Middle East. And those of us who have worked as activists, as scientists, trying to make governments accountable for the bad decisions, really get disappointed when we see the international media or some scientists in the West or global North not knowing the context and climatize every bad thing in the Middle East, every environmental degradation aspect in the Middle East. Climate change is certainly a catalyst, right? Increased temperature means increased evaporation, increased demand for water, less water availability on one side. And then we have seen changes in precipitation, at least regimes, and some changes in some areas. We're seeing more rain than, so less snow or less snowpack. So all of these have an impact. But then when it comes to, for example, a Lake Urmia or Great Salt Lake in Utah, or the issues of water bankruptcy of California, which fortunately recently I think they're getting a relief out of so for a few years they can get some rest. But if you look at these problems around the world, you see that the mismanagement element is huge and it's very impactful. The anthropogenic changes, the changes in land use, the changes in patterns of water use, the building infrastructure, tweaking everything, and perturbing flows, moving water from one location to another for a beneficial human use. So if you look at all those things at the local scale, I wonder how you can irresponsibly climatize these things. I know it looks nice. I know the media likes it. And some donors even love it when you blame everything on climate change. And some of us innocently do that because we want to use any opportunity to get the attention of the world to climate change. So people are doing it and mean it in a good way. But then what happens is that, I've been a policymaker in the Middle East. The policymakers love you to blame a problem on climate change. They love you to climatize an event. So then all of a sudden, let's say Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, or I don't know, Libya, Egypt, like all of these countries, Dead Sea. So it's all about climate change. Who created climate change? Industrial economies. They took our oil, they did this to us, they harmed our environment, and we couldn't have done anything about it, right? So it's something that it's the externalities of what the decisions that have been made in other parts of the world. Whereas we know that by changing the way you operate the dams, by changing the way, like the amount of water you extract from groundwater, by changing your agricultural policies and so on, you can provide water to the wetlands, you can provide water to the river and environment and so on, and you can change the course. So we got to be very careful, and this is not only about the Middle East. Anywhere in the world, we're talking about water, we're talking about the environment. We have to understand that climate change is one of the many byproducts of unsustainable development. It's not the cause of all other environmental problems. They're interconnected: deforestation, desertification, climate change, water bankruptcy. These are all related to each other, and you try to mitigate one of those, you have an impact on the others. You try to adapt to one of those, you have an impact on the other one. So that is why I think we got to be careful about our narratives.
Let me ask you a quick follow-up question. So the term water bankruptcy, you've used it several times in this conversation. Would you mind expanding on it, articulate it to our audience what you mean by water bankruptcy?
I mean, as the name suggests, we are dealing with a situation of a bankrupt system where the demand is way more than the available resource. So that's the first thing. So a big gap between consumption or demand and supply. But there's also another important angle to it. For years we have been hearing the world talking about a water crisis. Yet, for 50 years we have not been even talking about water at this scale that we saw last month. A crisis, when you speak about a crisis, you're talking about an extreme situation, but everyone should get their act together and address the problem through mitigation. You still have hope that you can restore the system and fix the problem. Yet, when it comes to water resources, someone just before we start asked me about the situation of some aquifers in a dry part of Iran, and how long will it take to restore those? Would it be even possible to restore those things? And it's disappointing. I mean, many of these mitigation efforts would take us years, decades, and so on, and we might not be able to restore the system as before. A bankrupt system is a system that in which the recovery and restoration of all pieces is impossible. A bankrupt person, a bankrupt institution has a strong message. You file bankruptcy when you want to send a strong message to all that we don't have enough resources available anymore. Not only we need to mitigate, but also we have to adapt. And adaptation is an important thing which is missing in the discussions that we have. We can mitigate through technology, we can mitigate through policies, but unfortunately some of the damages that we have created are permanent, and we have to understand that. And we have to communicate it properly to the stakeholders that it's impossible to fix everything. It's simply impossible. Maybe the next generation, or like it takes several generations to fix some of the things that we have done. Yeah.
I want to remind all of you, if you have questions, to please use the QR code or the link to ask them, and I'll be monitoring so that we can incorporate your questions into the conversation. A lot of what you just described is a fairly daunting outlook. But another concept here that I'd love for you to define along with water bankruptcy is environmental justice. So how do we kind of think about solutions to a lot of those issues you've just described, but also with justice in mind?
So fortunately, we are now hearing more about environmental justice. The issues of environmental injustice are not limited to Iran or the Middle East. In this country, we know about Flint, Michigan. We have seen what has happened recently in Mississippi. We know what is happening in rural areas, groundwater, and so on. In Canada, the country I'm living right now, and we have the issues of First Nations and indigenous communities. In many places we have that. Fortunately, we're now hearing people talking about environmental injustice and they talk mainly about the impact side. What does it mean? It means that in the old days, for example, when it was we wanted to manage flood, we always said, move the water toward the low value properties, right? So because the cost of damaging the high value properties or expensive areas is much more than the economic cost of kind of like compensation we can provide in low value areas. But now we're waking up saying, but wait a minute, those who suffer more are the ones who are in a poorer condition. It is true that it costs you less. It costs you less as a state. It costs less for the insurance company, but it doesn't mean that the pain is less. We saw this during the pandemic also. Who got the vaccine? Which nations got the vaccines quickly? Which nations afforded staying at home, right? In some places, in the slums, what was social distancing for people living in slums? Getting out. Here we were telling people to stay at home. We were telling people to use different rooms, and we were asking people to wash their hands frequently. Where, over 1 billion people don't have access to clean water and toilet even. So the poor would be suffering more from the disasters. Even when it comes to climate change, the rich nations can survive, might be able to survive, but those are the ones who would lose. And they're the ones who didn't have any contribution, minimal, they had a minimal contribution to the current situation that we are in. Unfortunately, we're now still talking about the impact side. So what is happening to people, and let's worry about that. We don't talk about the cause and the responsibility that the rich nations, rich people, rich communities have. Those who brought the world to this stage. Of course, technological innovations in the global north. Who's the beneficiary? Both the global south and the global north. But we are in this situation where the global north is here and the global south is here. And as now they want to develop, we say, oh, wait a minute, you shouldn't be eating meat, you shouldn't be building these plants, and don't use fossil fuels, and don't do this, don't do that. We even blame the countries that are selling oil, for example, without talking about that history, the cumulative greenhouse gas emissions, for example. Who's responsible for that? Which nations emitted more over the course of history? And do they have any responsibility today? Without a transfer of technology, without a transfer of knowledge, we can't really have the poor nations address their problems and cope with this new situation. The other aspect, and very important aspect, is of all environmental problems, is consumerism. Right? Still, GDP is the way of measuring success, more production. If you want to produce more, you have to also, and sell more, you have to promote consumption. And that's the problem. The engine of growth is production. And we, once, we were talking about conserve, do this, do that, but at the same time, we want to get people consume more, and we have to produce more. And we are the ones who are setting the coordinates of development. How do the developed people look like? Probably like what Hollywood is telling us, what the media of the West is telling us. There are people who are starving, who can't even, eat meat. Every few months, they might have a chance to eat some meat. And then we are asking those nations to eat less meat and don't touch steak. Here we're thinking about beyond meat, but for those nations to go around meat, we have to think smartly. Now in the Middle East, and some countries, there's another thing. It's like, and this is also true here in other places. So we say success is always like, success belongs to the successful. It's the successful that attracts more resources, invests more, has the talents, has the power, has the capacity to make the changes. And in a competition between, let's say, a big city and a small village, the big city is always the winner. Las Vegas is always winning the game of attracting more water resources compared to its surrounding, because it's powerful. Los Angeles does the same thing. Silicon Valley has the same power. So the problem we have is this sort of uneven development. So the issue of You have urban areas where people are very wasteful when it comes to using their resources, and then you have rural areas where people don't even have clean water to drink. And that is another thing. And on top of it, you might argue that systematically, I'm not saying intentionally, that's hard to argue, but systematically we are seeing some ethnic minorities in like poor areas, some regions are suffering from the lack of investment in infrastructure, lack of proper development. Many places we have, for example, Iran, we have overdammed a lot of rivers, but there are areas where the lack of dams actually result in big floods and a lot of people dying, or at least poor development, poor planning has resulted in this. So environmental injustice, injustice must be something I think on the top of our policy agenda, our demand, or prescription for the world when it comes to solving problems.
So a lot of what you just described sounds really complex, and you can call it, issues caused by having systems of systems, or having to deal with wicked problems, and water management seems to be one of those wicked problems and everything that's around it. Now, there seems to be a paradox because, the people running the Middle East, the decision makers, they're in love with technology. They can show it off. They can shoot they can do photo ops next to these great technologies like a dam or other technological feat. And at the same time, coming from a research background, we were in research and development. There's a lot of good technologies being developed. Why can't these two parties work together to ship the technology there, transfer the technology, and just solve the issues? What seems to be the problem?
Technology is part of the solution, right? So it's like complex problems need a portfolio approach, and always technology is part of the solution, but they're not sufficient on their own. An example, I think it's irrigation efficiency is a very, very good example. So whenever there is water shortage somewhere in the world, the immediate reaction of media or even some experts is, change to flood irrigation to drip irrigation, you solve the problem. Guess what? You change flood irrigation to drip irrigation, the efficiency of water use goes up. Farmers are not stupid to give you that water back. They either change to a thirstier crop or expand their irrigated land. So their water consumption goes up, and you lose your return water. So the water consumption goes up as the result of improving irrigation efficiency. Does that make technology bad? Absolutely not. But if you implement technology and use technology without proper, so this is hardware. If you have only hardware without proper software, your system would fail. Together with this irrigation efficiency improvement, you need laws, measurements, and all those to make sure that the amount of water saved through this exercise would be transferred to a national reserve or the environment and so on, and it's not being wasted like this. So if you only promote technological solutions, you can't even exacerbate the problem, and we have seen it. We built dams. Then at the beginning things were well. But then many communities became dependent on dams, and now we don't have enough water to give them. So we promoted development through dam building, through transfer of water, but we didn't have other controlling measures there. Now, why is that? Because you mentioned it. Well, these are complex problems or wicked problems, not complicated problems. Here we are dealing with the distinction between a complicated problem and a complex problem. Again, let's use the COVID-19 example. So the world was facing a crisis, still we might be in it. COVID-19 was a crisis that we dealt with just recently, during which finding a vaccine, a cure for the disease was a complicated problem. You bring the scientists together, throw money at them. Eventually, some recipe would come out, some solution would be there. But managing the COVID-19 crisis was a complex problem. not a complicated problem, because it had all these aspects. You say, shut down, stay at home, your economy is falling. You want to fix the economy, your health system is under pressure. You want to fix that, then there is another thing. And because everything is interdependent, by nature, by definition, in science, we say complex problems don't have a solution. So then your responsibility is to navigate through complexity. All you can do is to do something that down the road your unintended consequences are minimal, or your damages are not permanent. Complicated solution though complicated problems have a solution. So I don't know, making a kubide fesinjun, something like that. Kubide is always like something, you go to every house, they have a recipe for kebab, Iranian kebab. It's a complicated problem, it's a complicated meal. But providing food to a nation is a complex problem. You want to make your nation self-sufficient, then you will drain your water resources. Now you want to protect your water resources, stop farming, farmers go unemployed. You become dependent on other countries. So that is something we need to understand. If policymakers don't understand the distinction, or scientists don't understand the distinction between a complicated and a complex problem, they try to use technologies to solve a complex problem. A complicated problem solution applied to a complex problem, then there would be a failure.
So we have a lot of good questions from our audience. One of them comes from Chris Gilmore, who asks, what policies are the UN implementing across the Middle East to address things like water insecurity? Are there such policies? Is that something that UN can do?
I mean, we're not a policy implementer in a sense. Well, we work with governments to facilitate problem solving. So that's something we need to understand, the UN role and our expectations from the UN. During the pandemic, I saw lots of tweets where citizens of different countries were asking the UN to help, to rescue them from their governments. So the UN is an entity that tries to essentially, without interfering with the internal matters of countries, domestic matters of the countries, facilitate a positive change and win-win solutions. And that is why a lot of times actually our action would be limited to, like I know the Iranians joke about the role of the UN, and it's about expression of sadness and about a lot of events, because it's really hard to interfere. Yet I think we're seeing a very positive development across the UN when it comes to water. We are seeing a lot of changes. Now different entities are talking about water. They're seeing water as one of the forgotten resources that everything else is relying on. You know that food has FAO, then health has WHO, environment has UNEP. But who owns water? Which agency works for water? We have UN Water as a mechanism of coordination among UN agencies, but we don't have any institute designated, any entity designated to water at that level. So I think it's, we shouldn't expect the UN to intervene. We should instead try to come up with a solution that respects the complications and complexities on the ground, and understand how we should address those trade-offs. And in dealing with water, the most important thing is to ask who is managing water around the world. 70% of the water around the world is in the hands of farmers. And they're the ones who produce our food, who rely on water for their livelihood. And if you want them to change their behavior, you have to provide something in exchange. They're rational, they're doing the right thing in their own setting. If you were in their shoes, you would do exactly the same thing that they're doing. Now, this political economy problem is a problem we don't have any solution for, we haven't thought properly about. Say, you want to fix a problem in a country like Iran. 90% of water, it goes to the agricultural sector, at least we say. Exact value might not be unknown. The country wanted to become food self-sufficient. Even before the revolution, the issue of wheat imports was like an issue of, I think, discussion and debate and fight with the rest of the world. After the revolution, with war and all other things, ideologies and so on of the Islamic Republic, and sanctions and so on, they wanted to become food self-sufficient. They drain water resources. But not only they did that, but they also have a huge, a large portion of population relying on water for their livelihood, for their job. Now, if I say, stop farming, not only I'm shooting myself in the foot because of lack of food production, but also people get unemployed. And unemployment is by far more frustrating to any government, any decision maker in the world than environmental issues, which are, kind of long-term issues. And with the first rain, we forget what the situation we were in. And I think this is also very important to understand that we have to diversify the economies, and if to diversify the economies, we have to get out of this situation. You cannot function in resistance, mode, or you cannot fight with the rest of the world, or you cannot be in a constant conflict nationally. I'm not talking about Iran, anywhere in the world. So to be able to diversify your economy and move farmers from one sector to another, you have to make some decisions that are not relevant to the water professors or water, decision makers, those in charge of water districts. These are high-level decision making, high-level policies that are costly. Politicians want to avoid those. We see Israel as an example of a game changer. So Israel, if you look at, they also, you build a new country, and from day one you know the limits, and you're on constant battle with the rest of the world, given your history and everything. But there is desire for food self-sufficiency. There is desire for huge agricultural production at home. But at some point you realize this is impossible. Technological innovation is there, desalination, recycling and reuse and minimize leakage and so on that we have everywhere. But if you look at what Israel has done well, and less people don't talk much about, even the leaders of the country, that is the ability to decouple the economy of the country from water. So that was done through some major decisions at the high level about how much, what am I going to do with my food? So in 2000, around 2009 and 10, Israel, that is known for a lot of desalination plants, for example, was only providing 10% of its water from desalination. Yet the country managed to reduce its consumption to the 1960s level. That's like 50 years after. Whereas in other parts of the Middle East, for example, we're seeing steadily water consumption is going up despite the drought, despite the declining water resources and so on. So these are very hard decisions to be made and very costly. And I'm afraid many people would delay them, many policymakers, till that day zero comes and a scary situation might emerge.
So, related to handling water problems in the Middle East, and there was a great example of, although there are some things that there is always room for improvement with any water management system, but Israel is an example where technology and policy has been used to do better on water management and meeting the demand. Can we copy what they did, or can we transplant the water governance structure and the solutions they have employed to solve problems elsewhere?
Depends. Yeah. So first, the question of who's we. But if it was so easy to copy it, I think California, Colorado, all these places wouldn't have had problems. Again, the complexity is a serious issue. The way your development course and path, they're everything is dependent. So your decision today is dependent on the decision made by someone before you yesterday. So you can't really revolutionize everything. So I used to teach environmental security in the Middle East at Yale, and we always had this debate about why Israel could do it and why others might not be able to do it. First of all, so you can't, if you want to provide good solutions for water, you have to understand the context. So history is an important thing. How long was the history? When was this nation built? What were the conditions? It's much easier to build a new state than change some of the rules and laws that have been there for thousands of years. Maybe it's much easier to justify some political reforms under international pressure when you have to fight for national security and so on. And it's much easier to appreciate the limitation of water when you don't have water. Compare a country with Israel, compare other countries with Israel. Turkey, is that in the same, same size, same water availability? Compare Iran with Israel, the same water availability, same distance of some cities where water demand is high from the coast. So they're very, very, very different in terms of their climate, their geography, their socioeconomic conditions. All nations can learn from each other, from failures, from success. That's the problem starts when you try to actually blindly copy things from one place to another. And that's what we have done. If you look at the history, for example, of Iran, when the Romans had the aqueducts, the famous aqueducts, the Iranians, the Persians had qanats, underground tunnels for groundwater transfer. Through qanats, Iranians could live and adapt to limited water resources for thousands of years. Then what happened? We got familiar with dam building, with digging wells. There was land reforms, the introduction of technology, change of the structure, the governance structure that was in place. It was unfair. It was abusive and so on. But then we didn't have a serious plan. As a result, the qanats were killed, right? And then the technologies that we introduced became not only insufficient, but also the cause of some additional problems and burden. Yet, through the technological reforms, let's appreciate that. Iran's population, for example, was below 10 million. How long ago? So not long ago it was below 10 million. By the time of revolution, we were about 38 million, and then 1979, and then 2 decades after, more than double that amount. So technological reforms also facilitate development, and you need better economic conditions to be able to address. So this is the problem. This is the paradox. So to think about the environment, you got to be, your pockets must be full, and your stomach should be full also. Otherwise, you normally don't think about it. If you're starving, if your kids are crying of hunger, you're not going to think about cheetahs and what's going to happen to the next generation and citizens of the planet. You're thinking about your home. You're thinking about your children. You're thinking about money and shelter and so on. So this is the real challenge that we have. So we want to develop. We want to improve the well-being and socioeconomic conditions of our citizens. But when we do that, we create environmental problems, then it might be late to address environmental issues because some of the problems we create are irreversible.
So we have over 30 questions. I apologize if we don't get to all of your questions, but I'm going to try to kind of ask several of them in one. So we've got several questions here that have to do with addressing specifically water security in Iran. Some of the questions have to do with suggestions to pump water from the Gulf into desert areas or water transfer kind of solutions. Others ask about whether desalination is a potential route to take. What is your take on how Iran might address this water security issue?
I think we talked enough about technology. So you'd be stupid, I'd be stupid if I'm totally against the technology or in love with one technology. Let's use knife as an example. With a knife, you can kill people or you can save a life in a surgery room. So is knife a good thing or a bad thing? How do I know? How are you going to use it? It all depends on how you use it, what size it is, how much resources you use for its production. So technology, dams, pumps, water transfer technologies, projects, desalination, extracting water out of air, recycling and reuse, all of those must be part of the solution. But there is a big difference between a desalination plant of this size and this size. There is a difference between what you use it for. Are you going to desalinate the water of the Persian Gulf and put the brine back into the Persian Gulf and kill the marine life there and the marine resources, to transfer water like 600 kilometers up to use it for growing cucumber? Then that's problematic. That's something we should be scared of. And unfortunately, we are seeing some of these stupid decisions being made. Why? Because it's, again, much easier for a decision maker to give a contract to a big developer rather than going and dealing with millions of farmers and asking each individual farmer to conserve and use less. So if, for example, if you're talking about Iran, there are people in some coastal areas that are suffering from water shortage. Water, so for them, my first objective, my first priority must be, making sure that they have enough water for drinking, they have enough water for being healthy and remaining healthy. But then when it's about taking water for agriculture somewhere else, then I have to compare things. So what are my other options? Can I change my crop pattern in central Iran? Can I stop this industry? Can I move it? If you look at Iran in particular, historically we have had reasons to do the development inland. So we've gone far from the southern coasts. Whereas in other parts of the world, you always place people near the coast, near the water. So Iran is the opposite. So we've gone inland where it's dry, and then now we want to bring water to people. Shall we move people to water? Shall we do development in other places, provide them with opportunities? Do we need to continue providing water to agriculture, or shall we create opportunities in other sectors, industrial growth, service sector? Iran is capable of growing its other sectors. That's what Iran needs to do. Iran is not the best place to grow food for, as the major industry. Of course, Iran also needs to invest in a strategic food production. Any nation should do that. The world after Russian invasion would not be similar to the world before the Russian invasion, now that we are seeing what can happen to nations with food imports. Same for energy, like the energy policies of the Europeans after the invasion would be different from before the invasion. The world is not, unfortunately, that beautiful place that people are talking about. And you have to still take care of your nation and your people. So I think we got to be careful about what we say. Technology is part of the solution. Technology must be part of the solution, but don't fall in love with a solution. Don't hate the solution. Don't fall in love with the water management model in one country or hate it just because it's your enemy or you don't like it. Bring all these things together, understand your conditions, compare your options with other options, build a portfolio, adopt a portfolio approach, and at the end of the day, remember that water problems would be on this planet till humans are on it. So we will always have water problems and environmental problems. That would be forever.
We have several questions here that also kind of bring us to this. I'm going to clump them together under the category of security, because we have all kinds of wars, sanctions, other kinds of politically motivated limitations on what countries can and can't do, especially as it pertains to addressing environmental degradation, water insecurity, things like this. So where do you see the ability for countries to be able to prioritize these issues in light of some of those limiting political factors?
So again, I think if a country is this is a reality, this is a fact, if a country is not performing well economically, it doesn't have the bandwidth to deal with the environment. We don't like this, but this is the truth. Even in the most developed nations, during the pandemic, we didn't care about the environment. We stopped talking about climate change. We stopped talking, getting together, like the UN events, UN conferences, and so on, because at that point, we wanted to save lives. And wait a minute, but aren't the human overpopulation of the planet the cause of environmental problems? No one said, let people die, that's good for the planet. We wanted to save lives, right? So, and we were selfishly getting vaccinated, even the environmental activists. We wanted to stay alive. We could do the planet a favor and die peacefully. But we didn't do that because this is what we this is the reality. Humans, all of the things we're doing is for the survival of humans. We want to keep our species around. Otherwise, the earth would be there without us, after us. So the same is true for countries. If your country is in constant tension, if you're suffering from an invasion, domestic war, can you think about the future? Can you expect the Yemeni kid to think about what's going to happen to the world in 2100? Can you, so I remember in my political life or after, I've had conversations with different politicians. I remember once I was talking to the Deputy Minister of Environment in Yemen, educated in Canada, and we're talking and he said recently there was an endemic tree that in some war zones people were burning, and I wrote a letter and said you shouldn't be doing this, and people were crying laughing at me, and in a war zone, you're talking about endangered species and that, no one cares. And when I'm talking with this guy, I realized that over the last 8 months or so, they have not been able to pay the salaries of their employees. In a situation like this, do you really expect people to think about the environment? I was talking to an Afghan minister once, and comparing Iran and Afghanistan after COVID-19, the problems were extremely different. I mean, they're even suffering from, they can't even monitor what is going on. They don't have the vaccines. They can't give food to people. Their problems are different. Once I was telling the Afghan head of environmental agency about the great things I'm doing in Iran about campaigns and air pollution, this and that and that. And we're talking, and then I realized his concern is indoor air pollution and my concern is outdoor air pollution. If you talk to any Iranians, we know and we say that we grew up in one of the most polluted cities on this planet, as a person from Tehran. Indoor air pollution was never my problem. I never worried about that in Iran. I never even, we never even realized it existed. So the type of problems we're dealing with are very different. This is another thing. When we talk about a problem of environmental security, which is now becoming very attractive to the intelligence and defense community, they love to securitize the environmental space also. So everything is all about, okay, environmental degradation would cause national security problems. Drought came and in Syria, and then we had all this, an explosion, and then the Arab Spring was caused by climate change or something. These funny arguments that get a lot of media attention, by the way. So the mentality here is that environmental degradation would cause national security problems, migration, and so on. So let's go fix the environmental problems to avoid those problems. No one talks about how the lack of, the issue of national security, bad governance, poor, human development, and all those things are causing environmental degradation. The fact that environment is getting worse and worse, the fact is that this country is suffering from national security problems. That's why they don't have the bandwidth to think about about water and environment. So if you now disaggregate the environmental sector and say, okay, I'm going to work with farmers in this area to manage water sustainably, what are you talking about? And we see these funny solutions. So in the case of Afghanistan, we had some smart people with some, finding probably a rich donor or a development agency, got money to give solar pumps to Afghan farmers. That was smart, right? It's a sustainable solution, solar pumping, and there's water, improved livelihood. Yes, absolutely, it happened. But immediately after, first of all, groundwater level went down. Second, it contributed to less, essentially, surface water flow toward Iran. So you created also a problem in another basin and a wetland going dry and dust storms in the region. But then the other thing was no one was questioning what were they growing with, using water for. As a result of this sustainable solution, there was no shortage of heroin for a while in Europe, because poppy cultivation was a solution there, and it was good. So we had fluctuations in the climatic conditions, drought, but poppy production was on a steady growth in that part of the world. And so this is so now if I want to solve this problem, can I really disaggregate the issue of environment with governance and this and that? So now let's talk about sanctions. If you look at the sanctioned states, look at North Korea, look at Iran. They're under sanctions. Did they stop developing, ballistic missiles or missiles? No. What is a national priority for them? This is their national priority. It could cost $1, it now costs $10 or $20, but they do it. What they would cut from is other sectors. Now, this doesn't mean, because there's one access to technology is one side of sanctions, that if there are sanctions, your access to technology, your ability to transfer funds, and those would be cut. Yeah, that's part of the story. But which one is harder, building a missile or an air filter for your cars? So building an air filter for your cars is much easier in terms of technology. They could do it. It's not their priority. Don't expect a country that is willing to sacrifice its whole nation for its ideology to give up on its ideology for the sake of environment. It's not going to happen. I'm not arguing if sanctions are good or sanctions are bad, or who's the cause, or shall we blame Iran's environmental problems on the West? That's not my argument. The argument is about a nation that is going down, a nation that is into functioning in the survival mode would not care about the environment, and that is sad. Even us, let's say the Iranians in the last 6, 7, 8 months, they have been talking about lots of problems. Of course, these are problems that like our brothers and sisters getting killed on the street or getting arrested. But at the time that people are suffering from these things, can I talk about the environment? People would not listen to it. That's not the first priority for people, and understandably. So if the nations are going down, the environment goes down. And I'm afraid, this is why I say the context is different. If you look at the U.S. West in the 60s, 70s, they have gone through some of the, they produced some of these problems that we have produced today. But they could decouple their economy from water, or at least reduce the pressure of their economy on water. They could migrate inside the country from one location to another after the Dust Bowl and all that. The problem in the Middle East is different, though. The chance of reaction, the capacity to react to the problem is very limited. And yet these things happen. If you want to analyze them properly, understand the history. You cannot blame Iran's problems on sanctions. You cannot, and you cannot say that the Syrian crisis was created by a drought. Did drought have a role? Yes. But don't dismiss decades of bad management of the agricultural sector and water sector when you are analyzing the problem. You were talking about refugees and migration, and it's easy to blame everything on climate change. Try to understand the context and why people are moving. It's easy to find correlation between temperature and anything these days. With AI and data science, you can tell us. But seriously, we got to understand what is happening inside countries.
So we've heard a lot of reasons to be concerned. We're convinced that there's a problem. We understand a lot of the impacts are entrenched. A lot of the questions we have here are about solutions. Is there hope? What can science offer us as a way of thinking about how we might be able to take positive steps forward, even if they're small at first?
Oh, if there were no hope, I wouldn't have been here. I'm here because there's hope. I think we should talk about these problems. We should dissect them. We should understand how incapable we are in that complex system, then search for solutions. Why am I hopeful? Because there are people, the last 2 days I've been here, I'm seeing all these examples of solutions that are being provided at the right scale to people. I mean, we have students at this university with a land grant mission, working with farmers, working with water districts, working with different stakeholders, trying to fix things, understanding what is happening on the ground, understanding how technology can be useful, combining it with the understanding of socioeconomic conditions, policy reforms, and so on, to provide a solution. We can provide the solution. The solution, the problem is when someone who has studied a tiny bit of the planet in Oklahoma thinks that solution can be upscaled to the whole world and prescribes that solution to friends in Saudi Arabia or United Arab Emirates and say, you go to do the same thing and you get the same result. That's a problem that we can avoid through exchanges, through these conversations. I'm hopeful because I look at your program. You're what, if not the first Iranian studies program, Iranian Persian Gulf studies program that care about the environment. You care about contemporary issues in Iran, looking at the expertise you have on campus and how you can combine it. And don't prescribe for Iran. Learn about their problems, learn about what is happening here, facilitate an exchange of information, see if there would be any solution. We can provide solutions. Humans would continue to fight. We're smart. We might innovate tomorrow. We have no clue what can happen. 4 years ago, we had no clue. In the worst projections of what can happen to this planet, no one saw this pandemic would be coming. And when it came, we wouldn't have imagined that a lot of things we are doing today would be feasible. We never thought that all of these things that we can do with remote education, remote meetings would be feasible. Humans are resilient and humans can adapt quickly when needed. I think we just have to work on creating that sense of urgency. We also have to work on our arrogance, reduce our arrogance, understand what is happening around the world, and provide better solutions. Technology is part of the solution. With interdisciplinary science and research and solutions, we can make a world a better place for all. But we have to, in doing so, think about the unintended consequences of our intervention and think about justice elements and injustice elements. An example, to end the conversation with, is what I'm really worried about these days: electric vehicles. We're very excited about those. I'm driving an electric vehicle, by the way. But when you look at the supply chain, where the lithium comes from, and you learn the stories, you figure out what is happening in Bolivia, in the mining areas, what happens to people. A colleague of mine recently was showing her results. So when we went to the area, first of all, it was like really high elevation, hard to work at. She was sharing their observations. Quinoa is their traditional food. They can't afford it anymore because now we are very interested in it. The price has gone up. They get exported. First thing. She says, they go to the area, they realize the pollution level is really, really high. And you look at the standards and like, how many times the pollution is bigger, you immediately conclude there should be cancer everywhere. So she says we go and explore, there is no cancer. People have adopted. But life expectancy is 40. People die much before, before they develop cancer. And these workers are working in bad conditions, the elevation is bad, they have to drink alcohol to be able to work, then child abuse, women abuse is high in houses. Do we learn about these things at all? Like, I'm driving my Tesla and I'm quite happy about my solution in North America, where people are suffering, where we have seen what has happened to the oil providing states. We might see the same thing happening to the critical mineral states, and the future can be scary if we don't talk about those and don't see those things actually. So we got to see the full supply chain, full picture, and care about everyone.
So you're one of the scientists who are frequently communicating with the public through different platforms, and I would describe it as coming out of your comfort zone, reaching out to the public, and putting yourself out there, trying to explain these complexities, and understandably, a lot of these things are very confusing. So, do I drive my Tesla or do I not, and what should I be caring about? And in this day and age, when the society is so divided, and we tend to lean toward extreme parts of the spectrum, and you're seeing a lot of pressure, and for doing some research and pitching your results in a certain way. For example, there was a recent example of it with some of your past work showing the water footprint of data and using internet, and you're receiving these criticisms from say media and other places. And first of all, why should I reach out to the media and try to explain these things, and how do I handle these pressures if I come out of my comfort zone? And maybe you can also shed light on some of your past research on the water footprint of data too.
I can, yeah.
Short question.
Yeah. It's like, so communication. I think that must be the mission of all academics. I really think so. I wish we had a different way of evaluating promotion and tenure within universities to see who's doing useful work. If you can't communicate your work and make it useful to the general public, maybe you should stop. And I think we have produced so much useless stuff that are in our shelves and in our journals that no one cares about. And I think it's a little bit of corruption there. The system is very superficial. But then, in terms of communication, yes, it's divided. You talk about things on social media, people give you like nasty comments, they attack you, and they bully you, and so on. But part of it is the society. Of course, they're insensitive to, you have studied that problem for 20 years and they don't even care about it. So you talk and you try to make them uncomfortable for the choices they're making. Of course, they're gonna push back. But part of this issue of communications is must be blamed on our side. We've all got, a lot of us have got PhDs. We write papers, we publish them in journals, we get some comments from our peers. The hardest things we need to deal with is like some people, some grumpy professors on our PhD committees, and then some reviewers who might be impolite and talking to us. But then we publish, we go to conferences, we take photos, we get awards from our peers. We publish about water resources, how the world should address water issues. The first time you face a farmer, the whole situation would be different, right? So all your assumptions are wrong. The farmer doesn't care about your mathematical model of what you have concluded and all of that. And then you might realize that even all your assumptions and all the things you have got awards for are wrong. So part of the problem is our lack of understanding. We're not really we don't understand the sensitivities of the society. It's easier for us to remain in our ivory towers and think that those out there are irrational. They're stupid. They're not making the right decisions. If you go and talk to them, then you realize maybe you are the one who is being irrational and stupid and naive about how the world is being run and what is happening. And if this exchange exists, then your solutions would be different. As I say in game theory classes, and I've repeated this a few times now since yesterday, there is always a good reason behind every bad decision. Our job is to go and figure out why that decision was made in that way and find a justification for it. Then we can come up with a solution for a change. And a lot of times we realize that if we were in the same shoes, we would have made the same decision. We develop sympathy for decision makers, even those we hate. We develop sympathy for farmers, users, water, citizens, and so on, and then talk about things, of course. I told you, I use this example. I'm not going to tell the starving African person or Iranian person about avoiding meat. I know that people are suffering from hunger, or like parents who write to me on social media saying that their children have not had meat for the last 6 weeks or so. To those, and they're complaining about some environmental activists talking about going vegan and this and that, and not understanding what. So I, of course, in this situation, I'm with those parents, and I understand that sensitivity, and I don't talk about this. Yet still, there are occasions that I might get bombarded for any reason, mainly in my case, is political reason. That this example that Dr. Mirchi just told us about is, we did a research back in 2015 about the water footprint of data centers and the internet use, and our results were very interesting. You download 1 gigabyte of data, the water use for that is huge. And we did a follow-up study during the pandemic just to show that our transition to Zoom, Teams, Skype and all these things, or Netflix, are also associated with huge water footprint, carbon footprint, and land footprint that we should not forget, because it's hidden. We think everything is clean now that we're not driving, flying. Not to say that we should avoid these technologies, but to also understand that new habits of life or new intervention or new style of life is also associated with environmental consequences. So you've gone from red meat to white meat. You can also have the option of vegetables. So think about all those options. But yet, I get attacked for doing some work in 2015 because people now in Iran are worried, and it was not related to Iran whatsoever, because people in Iran are now are suffering from censorship and internet shutdown and so on, and they're thinking, what if this guy's research justifies more censorship and limitation of the internet, thinking that, and someone comes online with intention, says, look, this guy has said, using less internet means less water use. Iran has water issues, so maybe he did this to justify internet shutdown. And people attack, they get emotional, they see this, and not everyone bothers to go and see the original paper, what it was saying. It was a peer-reviewed publication. They don't care about these things, and conspiracy theories goes out, and there is a lack of trust issue and so many other things. So and humans are humans. We saw the attitudes and reactions of different nations, people within different nations, to vaccination and technology and changes. They were pretty much the same. We had Floridians who were reacting in a way that some people in the Middle East were reacting to the vaccine, or these things exist. I think we have to suffer. We have to also back each other up. We shouldn't let the end justify the means. If we hate a government or a leader or a president, we just tweak our narrative because we don't want So Donald Trump also said some positive things or useful things. If I'm a scientist, if I'm a factual and I'm a Democrat, I have to say what is right when Donald Trump is in power and say what is right when the other party is in power. So that is something that we also, I think, need to fix, that we shouldn't let our emotions or political affiliation and other things interfere with our narratives and judgments. And we have to put ourselves out there. You know, they shoot at, we're too many, I think, thanks to the funding that is being provided with us. If they shoot 10 of us, there's still like hundreds out there that they can continue talking to people, and hopefully the future would be brighter.
All right, well, thank you so much, Dr. Madani, for addressing all of these questions. I know that some of them didn't get addressed right away, but I appreciate all of you being here, and thank you for watching on the live stream as well. Please join me in thanking Dr. Madani. A small gift.
Oh, thank you. And I didn't get a chance to first of all, welcome you all, and then thank you for the invitation, and also the discussion. It has been a pleasure being here. I'm getting excited about everything happening here, and we're exploring ways of cooperation between the United Nations University and OSU. So really looking forward to it. It was a pleasure to meet many of you, and learn about your work. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.